used in the reporting of that event on that day and the following days. So it's like we were really puffed up on that one. Whereas, for instance, on the 9/11 thing, we got maybe 61% or something, enough to be accurate at the archetype level, but not sufficiently so in the detail to make it, actionable or really noteworthy, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does make sense. Well, even the Stanford Egg Project, I think, picked up massive shifts in energy prior to 9/11, and that validates what we're saying about the idea that there is that our idea of time and future and past is, we hold it as linear, but it may not actually be linear in nature.
Yeah, as we're fond of saying, it don't work that way.
Exactly.
Yeah, and another thing, though, too, is the Stanford Egg Project and their ability to pick up the emotional surge in a giant wave some, I think, 8 hours maybe, or even perhaps a day before. I'm not really sure the time parameters. Mm-hmm. But even so, it doesn't matter. My point on that is that it actually speaks more to the nature of consciousness than it does to time per se, if that makes sense. And so it actually aids us in defining the consciousness field that we all live in, or that we're all part of.
Now, we're going to start getting into, because we've got about 45 minutes left, I don't want to ignore some of the things that you have come up with that, now that you have a pretty decent track record, not that this is totally accurate, but this is something that certainly, as far as I can tell, provides major clues to possible experiences that are on the horizon.
And I'd say that's a fair assessment. And another way I like to say it is that we're about twice as good as academic version of chance would allow. Which means, though, we're wrong 50% of the time.
Well,
but, it's better than a weatherman, so hey.
Well, tarot cards, whatever.
Yeah.
So there's so much here in this data set, and some of the more interesting things have to do with events that are starting around 2009, moving into 2010, and I don't know quite where to start. It looks like one of the major events that seems inevitable, just from a logic standpoint, is the fall of the dollar, and that there's a lot that indicates that there will be some kind of collapse of the monetary system.
And that's pretty much the case. We have to be, I have a tendency to, being a linguist and being aware of the emotional impact of words on individuals, I try not to use fear words, and I try and dampen that down. I want everybody to be prepared. There's, going to be some nasty times ahead, but it doesn't mean we can't kick back and sort of, chill and watch it all unfold. We needn't participate in the negative energy and magnify it. We can take another approach.
Yeah.
And so it actually helps to discuss these things in a rather, let's say, dispassionate view.
Yeah.
But you're quite correct. Some really nasty things are going to occur, especially relative to the dollar, and there's so much globally that's tied to it. And even at a very high level in terms of our view of archetypes, but at a very deep emotional level, the dollar is fundamental to a paradigm that is in the process of dying and a new one being born. So the paradigm that we have is also being affected here and is going to go away, and that paradigm has really been pumped globally since the 50s and the emergence of the corporate version of advertising, where advertising took on a life of its own. But the paradigm basically is the idea of chasing the abstraction of the dollar. That's going to go away over the course of this next year. Now, in the process of that, the dollar itself is a mechanism of trade, currency, and then a dollar is a support for such weird other abstractions as derivatives and central banks and that kind of thing, and even warfare. All aspects of our lives are going to be affected by this because we're all going to lose confidence in the dollar. And that's going to be rather harsh to deal with because there is not an immediate replacement, and yet we have nearly 7 billion people on the planet that need to trade with each other, and it's going to be kind of hard to use, rocks or socks or seashells or something as a replacement. And so we got to get some other kind of mechanism going here. However, it starts off, actually, the last phase of the dollar that we're going to be into actually started on August 22nd in that week. and there was this little emotional peak period that sort of flattened out into a plateau from the 16th to the 22nd. And in that period of time, there was some language that leaked out about derivatives, which was one of our temporal markers. The language came in the Wall Street Journal above the fold, and it discussed the next phase of the banking crisis being related basically to these derivatives. And so it's like, aha, our temporal language is spot on. In fact, we even got some compliments from some academic or people of academic note in the economics world saying, yeah, we followed this, and boy, there it was, and sure enough. And so we're in this release language period that will continue from August 22nd all the way down to October 25. Most of the release language in there is going to be dominated by economics. But you note we also have all of the emotional release language showing up now around the Kennedy deaths, around all the other major news items that are happening. It seems that there's a qualitative, palpable change in the nature of the language that is surrounding us and that is bombarding us from all of the media. Based on even 2 weeks ago, people are able to now sense this once it's been pointed out to them that there's actually two basic forms, building tension language and release of emotional tension language. And we're in the release period where everybody's, crying and weeping and wailing and venting out and expressing. That's going to continue until the 25th of October, and then we're all going to take in a big gasp and just go, because something's going to occur that's going to bump us into emotional building tension language that will be very steep, very short-lived before there's another, or short-lived before there's another release period, but it'll be very intense. As the period we're in right now is very intense. Now, the intensity that we're going to experience as we get closer to October 25th is going to involve earthquakes and some more military action and some very large storms that are going to hit the U.S. and cause problems. But underlying it all and affecting everything will be the impact on the dollar and the markets. And then really from November 4th or so in our work here until November 2nd or 3rd of next year, 2010, over the course of that almost a complete solar year, the dollar as currency will in essence pass away. Wow.
Well, you can't say that it isn't time.
That's for sure. Actually, it's past time. Most paper currencies historically last between 58 and 72 years, so ours is a little long in the tooth, and they've been keeping it going with extraordinary measures. We're going to hit hyperinflation with simultaneous deflation. It's going to be really strange because we're going to have very expensive food and energy, anything dealing with calories. And that's what we've been calling the future economy. So let me complete that thought real quick. Anything based on calories in this next year sometime will progress into a noticeable period of hyperinflation. Calories come in the form of energy to heat you, energy to move your butt around, and energy to make your butt. So anything you can eat or put in your vehicle or heat your house with, eventually is going to start costing serious dollars because the currency will be dying, not because they will become more dear. But we're also, as a side effect of this, going to have shortages because a lot of people won't be shipping stuff into the United States. We won't be the consumer of last resort anymore. As our economy crashes, the world is going to have to readjust very rapidly, and it's going to put us into kind of a lurch. Not that, we don't deserve it for following these stupid fools from the Federal Reserve all this time.
Exactly. And that's a whole other conversation we can have.
Isn't it though? Geez, yeah.
I think people are waking up to the fact that the Federal Reserve is neither federal nor a reserve.
And it's a criminal cabal, in my opinion.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. They need to be investigated, and those that we can assume are mostly innocent need to be merely imprisoned.
Exactly. And also, you mentioned the powers that be a lot, and I think it's important for the listeners to realize that there is a shadow government and there is an elite that is pulling the strings of just about everything. And that in my own opinion, this could range from, the deaths of the Kennedys and so on, to every war that's ever occurred for profit.
Oh, I agree with you. At least since we know pretty sure since at least the 1800s and what were known as the fruit wars in Central America that it's all been corporately controlled. And I agree with you. I'm pretty sure that one of the last legitimate, emotionally clean presidents we had, that is to say, he may have been relatively dirty in some respects, but was emotionally for everybody, was JFK. And I'm quite certain it was the powers that be that had him offed because he sat up and said two things to him. Federal Reserve's got to go. We're going to make our own money, and I'm going to tell people all about the space stuff.
That's
in fact,
right.
he'd made a deal with Khrushchev for us to start moving into our planetary consciousness era.
That's right.
Less than 30 days later, within a lunar month, he was dead.
Yes, absolutely. And the oil industry and the rest of it has held any kind of progress on free energy or anything that's been developed or back engineered or developed on our own through Tesla's research for over 60 years.
That's correct, yes.
And so we've been living in a world that has, like, horse and buggy. The equivalent of living in a horse and buggy, because it can be metered, it can be sold, and it can be...
They can get power over you from it.
Exactly.
Yes.
And all of these Wall Street ups and downs are just designed to they're pump and dump operations.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's an emotional roller coaster designed to keep you focused on the activity of the ride and not the people that are maneuvering the levers. Yeah.
They get you to put the money in, and then they take it out, and then so on and so forth. So there's an extremely wealthy small group of elites who are, basically controlling the world. And
let's stop for a second though and examine some of this idea, because it's really interesting, especially as it relates to some of the work. Now, bear in mind that in the early 90s, I was just your regular old techie, geeky guy with his head in the software. Couldn't have told you that a Rockefeller from a Rothschild. You know what I'm saying, right?
Me too.
Okay. And so you come along and you open up this thing and you say, my, that's a real, I think, bit of string tangled up in there, and you start unraveling it, and all things lead back to essentially the powers that be, and this idea that they control the planet, no matter where you start, whether it's chemtrails, whether it's manipulation of currency, or any of this stuff. Death of Kennedy, it all leads back to the same thing.
Absolutely.
If you keep investigating, as does some really smart people like Catherine Austin Fitts, Solari group, right?
Yes.
She's a former Reagan administration individual who very high up.
One of my favorite people.
Yeah, she's just absolutely great. She's a real smart woman. And
absolutely.
She left because I think, in my opinion, it was a combination of the corruption and the stupidity, But in any event, she's come to the conclusion that everything comes back to the contact issue, or what we call the contact meme. That is to say, contact between Earth humans and any other form of consciousness.
Yes.
Outside of Earth, okay, which we have to get, now you start getting into all different kinds of definitions, of whether it's an ET, interdimensional, or all of that, but we don't really care. We look at things at an archetype level. But one of the things we've discovered here is actually it's starting to appear in the data, especially in this run, and I'm going to write about it in my Space Goat Farts subsection of the next report. But we're starting to get indications here that the powers that be are hoisted on their own petard. They've lifted themselves up on their own shoelaces, because here's what they've done. They've condemned the majority of humans to grubbing around in a pollution-filled world based on fossil fuels, while for the last 60 years, they've been very successfully demonstrating and building the next generation of hyperdimensional kind of energy forces, right?
Yeah.
In all of this. But get this. Earth is currently what's called a Class 0 civilization. We exist on our planet. We're barely aware of ourselves as a planetary mass. We don't really have outposts on other planets, but we're just starting to get out there. The next stage up from a 0-0 state is to become a Class 1 civilization, and that is where you're pan-planetary within your own solar system, and you're starting to step outside of your own solar system. Now, bear in mind that. And then let me continue. The Class 2 would be getting into other parts of the galaxy. Maybe you would go into other solar systems nearby and so on. And then a Class 3 would be a pan-galactic civilization, where you would be clear across the galaxy and this sort of thing. Now, our current level of thinking with academia is that can't happen because you can't carry enough rocket fuel. However, here's the deal. There exist already in the universe now multiple, probably billion Class